So what we're going to look at is called the prime factor method. And what we do is first, we have to prime factor all the denominators. And I find this to be an important part of the process. Once you get the answer, put the answer in a box. That makes it easier to go back to and look at, and it distinguishes it from the other prime factors, other prime factor answers that you may get from the different denominators. Definitely put a box around your answer for each denominator. 3. Okay, so 1 and 2 are not that difficult. 3 is what's new. After we prime factor our denominators, we look at the the factors that are in the prime factor boxes. Each prime factor has to be circled 1 time. It can only be circled 1 time. So if you have the same prime factor in 2 boxes, for example, 2 is a common prime factor. If 2 is in more than 1 box, you can only circle it 1 time. And you always want to circle the factor with the largest exponent. Then after that, step 4 is we multiply our circled values, and our answer is the LCD. So we'll use this method first on the 12 and 40 example that we looked at, and then we'll look at it for another example. Okay, so we have 2 denominators, 12 and 40. And I don't want to do the list method, but I need to know what the least common denominator is for these 2. So I'm going to prime factor, I'm going to choose 3 and 4. 3 is prime, so I stop there, but 2 is not. So down here I'm going to put my answer, and I want to put my prime factorization in exponent form. 2 to the second times 3. Over here, I'm going to choose 2 and 20. You can choose any 2 factors as long as they're not 1 and 40. This is prime, so I stop here. This is not prime, so I keep on going. Okay, so now okay, so here's my prime factorization of 12. Here's my prime factorization of 40. After we prime factor and put our prime factorization in a box, we need to circle every prime factor 1 time, but only 1 time. Well, I shouldn't say every, maybe I should say each. So what are my prime factors here? I have 2 and 3, 2 again, and 5. So 3 only shows up here. I have to circle my 3. 5 only shows up here. I have to circle my 5. Every prime factor has to be circled, but it can only be circled one time. Now I look at 2, it is in both boxes, but there's a difference here. This 2 is to the second power, and this 2 is to the third power. If there's a difference in powers, you always choose the largest power. So now I've circled all my factors one time, and it might help to cross this out once you circle the 2 so you don't get confused or include it. And it doesn't matter where the prime factors are in which box. Has nothing to do with it. It doesn't matter what box they're in. All you're doing is making sure that every prime factor that shows up in these boxes is circled one time only. So now I multiply these. 3 times 2 to the third times 5. So I'll do that over here. Two to the third is 8. 8 times 5 is 40. 40 times 3 is 120. So for smaller numbers, the prime factor method takes a little bit more time, so it's really not that worth it for smaller numbers. But for larger numbers, even though it takes time, it doesn't take as much time as writing the list out would. So let's look at an example. Suppose I was asked to add these two fractions. We'll get to how to do that in a little bit, but again, as I said, the first step is finding the LCD for these two. So 72 and 60 is really beyond what I've memorized from our multiplication facts. So I'm going to use my prime factor method here. Even though it's going to take time, I guarantee you, it's not going to take as much time as it would if I were to write out the list method for 72. So I have 72 and 60. I'll start with 60. Let's do 2 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 5. So I have 2 to the second times 3 times 5. And that's my prime factorization for 60. Now let's look at 72. I'm going to do 8 times 9. So I prime factored 8. Now let me prime factor 9. Okay. Okay, so let's look at my prime factors here. I have 2, 3, and 5. Those are my prime factors that are in my boxes. Every prime factor has to be circled one time and one time only. This is the only place that 5 shows up, so I'm going to circle it. 3 shows up in 2 boxes. I choose the larger exponent, cross that one out. 2 appears in 2 boxes. I have to circle the larger one. And then when I multiply what I've circled, I'm going to get the LCD. So 2 cubed is 8, 3 squared is 9. So 8 times 9 is 72, and 72 times 5 is 360. So it's not really difficult, you just have to be careful. Make sure that your bookkeeping is meticulous, and it never fails. It always gives you the right answer.